Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Friday, October 11th, 2024, and you're watching The Rundown, my, supposedly weekly podcast where I talk about various things happening in the video game industry, mostly due to demand that I come back for a podcast at some point because it had been a while since I've done one. So here's my solo podcast that people have been asking me to do for quite some time. This will be episode 6 of our podcast. I meant to have an episode last week, but due to some technical issues, especially with my ISP, I couldn't make that happen. And unfortunately, that did result in me having to make some changes for the particular news topics that I'm going to talk about today. But for the most part, I'll be touching briefly on some of those while going over some of the more recent happenings that happened this week as well. Speaking of said topics, for today's episode, we're going to be talking about, obviously, the 343 Studios rebrand to Halo Studios and why that whole thing is a mess to begin with. We're also going to be talking about some of the stuff that happened with Assassin's Creed Shadows that I meant to talk about last week and didn't get a chance to do because of technical issues. So I'm going to briefly, not briefly, but talk about some of the more important stuff that has come out of that situation since then. I might talk about some of the stuff that has transpired about Ghost of Yote since that initial trailer, and some of the rumors that have come out about that game since its initial revealing. Also going to be talking about the recent article that came out from IGN for Space Marine 2's developer Saber Interactive, where Tim Willits, the chief operating officer at Saber, talks about why video games, why AAA video games might be failing this time around. And he offers some insights about that. And then, of course, the fun bit of news that just sprouted up over the past couple of days is the possibility of Concord making a comeback. Now, if that sounds insane to you, trust me, it sounds insane to the rest of us as well. But I'll go into why that's coming up, why that's a possibility, and why it seems more likely than not. As always, do not forget to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the podcast. Also, you can follow me on social media platforms such as Twitter, obviously here on YouTube. Let's see. I guess I'm on Instagram, I'm on Discord. I'm on a whole bunch of platforms, but that stuff will be listed in the description below for those of you that actually read descriptions of videos. Consider that a fun little Easter egg for people that actually do the extra work and read descriptions for those, that actually give a shit. But without further ado, let's hop into our first bit of news today. And that is the Assassin's Creed Shadows drama that continues to unfold as time goes on, and Ubisoft as well. This whole thing is linked together with Assassin's Creed Shadows and Ubisoft as a company. It's a whole mess. But first up, there was a whole lot of news that dropped last week that I was going to talk about the possibility that Ubisoft and Tencent, who owns a significant stake within the company, is potentially looking for a buyout. And since then, there was a rumor that it dropped that Tencent might be looking to just straight up buy out the entire company. But these rumors didn't just pop up out of thin air. There have been a few YouTubers out there who have spoken to industry insiders, specifically those that work at Ubisoft, talking about some of the inner workings of what might be transpiring in the company. To kick things off, they talked a little bit about what's going on with Assassin's Creed Shadows and its delay, and why that delay may not be what it seems. I got a clip here that talks about that, so we'll watch that first, and I'll talk a little bit about it afterwards. Let's go straight into that. Hopefully the volume works fine. I tested this a little bit before I started this episode, and it seemed like it's okay, but when shit goes live, things can always break around that time. So here we go.
My source told me, however, that they heard February 2025 is simply a placeholder release date as of now. Apparently, this is because Ubisoft is scrambling and they need certain key talent in order to assist on a Q2 game release. Which, if you don't know what that means, there's 4 quarters to a calendar year, so Q2 means Ubisoft has something that they think will hit that is coming out later in the year that they need help on.
So, the idea that this game got pushed back to February 2025, and the idea that might not even be legit because they are pulling off a lot of key staff to go work on some other big release that got coming out of 2025, assuming Ubisoft is still around during that time and things haven't changed, or at least the majority of the employees haven't been laid off, assuming this buyout goes through. Because there was also news that if this buyout does happen, and the company is looking at laying off about 40% of its staff, which translates to roughly 8,000 people within the company as a whole. That's a lot of people losing their jobs. So all this stuff could be upended immediately when this buyout happens, and a lot of this stuff could get changed. It might be just a total buyout of the company or possibly selling off IPs to different companies. We'll see what happens. But Ubisoft is in dire straits right now, and it's not looking good. But that was the first bit of news. And some people speculate that they might have moved it to February in the first place to, celebrate Black History Month, considering that the game also features a black samurai, which has been quite contentious to say the least. As anybody who's followed news about that will tell you that it doesn't make any sense. But I've talked about that ad nauseum in the past before. So I'm not going to go over that again for this episode. Anyways, there's a lot more stuff coming out about this as well. Some people speculate that this delay happened because they wanted to potentially remove Yasuke from the game. But in my opinion, I don't see that happening because Yasuke is so entrenched in this game's marketing since it was revealed that pulling him out of the game, for one, I don't think they'll have enough time to pull him out of the game. But the amount of Access Media that would lose their collective shit if that happened, I can't see it happening at any point. If anything, perhaps they might reduce, maybe not even that. I was gonna say they might reduce some of his role in the game, but I can't see that happening either, considering he's a playable character in the game. However, what I can see happening, and these are things that people have talked about in the past, is that during that initial gameplay demo they showed back at, I want to say Gamescom. It was either Gamescom or the Summer Games Fest, where during Yasuke's section, as he was causing destruction in a village in Japan, they decided that they would play this mishmash of like Japanese music with hip hop, and that might have been some of the most tone deaf shit you could possibly think of. When it comes to that, you hear a lot of this talk about not wanting to stereotype minorities in video games and how it's important for representation and all that fun stuff. But then at the same time, you do exactly the very thing that you supposedly speak out against by stereotyping a black character in a video game. Let alone the fact that he's not even supposed to be there in the first place because Yasuke, from what we understand, there is no historical record indicating that Yasuke was an actual samurai. So you already have that going for you. But then you put him in the game, you have him wreaking complete havoc in a Japanese village. On top of that, you have hip-hop music playing at the same time. So some speculate that the reason why the delay is happening is so that they can also clean up some of that stuff. And chances are you can probably expect that a lot of that, at least in that case, the hip-hop music will likely be removed from the game because that was extremely tone-deaf on Ubisoft's part. Forgot to mention, by the way, the YouTuber that I'm getting all this information from goes by the name of Indebion. And I'll have a link to his channel in the description, either in the comments, well, probably in the comments, since people don't read descriptions evidently. So I'll probably have it in the comments section of this video. But he has a lot more because apparently quite a few insiders at Ubisoft have reached out to him to talk about what's going on, because it sounds like there's some desperation going on within the company and a lot of the employees are tired of it. But the whole delay happened, for those of you that have missed it, the whole delay happened right after the reveal of a figurine set that featured a broken in half Torii Gate. And for those that don't know, the half broken Torii Gate has some cultural and historical significance in Japan, based off of what happened in World War II when, the dropping of the atomic bomb happened on both Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And there is a Torii Gate in Nagasaki that is broken in half because of the events that happened back then, unfortunately. So to have that featured in a figurine set was, it goes back to the whole idea of them being incredibly tone deaf. And from what I understand is that when that happened and the backlash kicked off from that, like they were scrambling when that happened. Like it was bad news all around. And I think this might have been the kickoff because the developers had already been trying to push Ubisoft to delay the game in the first place because the game is a buggy mess and it's not going to be ready for prime time by the time November hits. So they already knew that the game wasn't going to be ready to ship around that time. And they had been pushing for the higher-ups at Ubisoft to delay the game so they'd have more time to polish it up and get it ready for prime time. And they were completely ignored. But I imagine that when all of this stuff happened, like the backlash, especially with the broken Torii Gate and the figurine, that was the catalyst to them saying, all right, you know what, guys, we'll give you that delay that you've been asking for so that we can get this shit, so that we can improve the overall image of our company and this game. I think that might be the only reason they got approval for this delay in the first place. And even then, that delay is placeholder. We'll see how it goes. Either they're aiming for that February 2025 release date, or it might be delayed back even further, depending on how things go. But there's also more. And this one I found to be kind of significant because I've heard this particular rumor corroborated by other YouTubers as well. So either the same insiders have reached out to other YouTubers, or it's just a confirmed thing all around when it comes to what this game was supposed to be. But I'll play that one next. Get out from the beginning. Turn the volume up.
I was also told when they originally saw the game, there was indeed a male Japanese protagonist with their own finalized art and even animations. They don't know if this character will be reintroduced in order to replace Yasuke, but they are skeptical that Ubisoft will actually remove Yasuke altogether due to the whole political, backlash they'll get from journalists and so on. I was also told...
So yeah, I've heard this confirmed by, well, corroborated, not confirmed, by different YouTubers as well, even before our boy Endymion here got information about this. I've seen quite a few videos well before this talking about how the original game did in fact feature a male Japanese protagonist, and that he was going to be the sole protagonist of the game. And this makes sense to me considering that I imagine the idea of an Assassin's Creed taking place in Japan had been kicked around for well over a decade now. Like, people have been asking for this to happen since the release of Assassin's Creed 3 way back in like 2012, 2013, around that time period. So you can imagine the idea had been kicking around during that time. And during the previous episode, one of my viewers, I think Vancy, she asked me why it took them so long to finally do an Assassin's Creed in Japan. And I kind of pulled some information off the back of my head based on trying to recall some things that I have heard in the past from the higher ups at Ubisoft, that the reason why they had done it is because they wanted to focus more so on making Assassin's Creed games in settings that you typically wouldn't think would feature an assassin in, for the sole purpose of wanting to try something new, and that an Assassin's Creed in Japan would be too on the nose. Well, I had done some digging since then to see if I could find anything that talked about that. And while I wasn't entirely accurate on that, I also wasn't too far off the mark. Let's say pull that article up real quick. Here we go. I found it. Let me just do this real quick. I found it. I'll show you guys what I'm talking about here in a second. Just hold on. Hold on. I got you guys. Just hold on. Let me put that on screen. This article is extremely old, and it was updated relatively recently. Well, not even really recently. It was updated in 2020, but it was first posted in 2014. Okay, but let me get this on the screen for you guys so you can see it too. As for the reason why they waited all the way up until now to finally do an Assassin's Creed in Japan is kind of crazy. But here we go. God, I have too many windows open. So I need a third monitor, man. All right, here we go. Let me just full screen that. So, oh, you guys can see the title up there, but the title at the top reads, Ubisoft Assassin's Creed in feudal Japan would feel too familiar. That doesn't mean it's completely out the table, though. And again, this article was first posted in 2014, October of 2014. And it was updated in January of 2020, probably around the time when they finally announced an Assassin's Creed taking place in Japan, which the game was the first announced as Assassin's Creed codenamed Red, before it was the Assassin's Creed Shadows we know as today. This was way back when Alex Hutchinson used to work at Ubisoft, and he worked on Assassin's Creed 3 and Far Cry 4. And he said to the publication Total Xbox that to expand on his comments is that the setting would be too boring. So I said it would be too on the nose to do so, but the actual comment is that it would be too boring. But let's go into it. Because you can always do it, but the point I was trying to make was that in broad strokes and scale of history, that's a theme that's been well mined in video games, he explained. So Assassin's Creed is one of those games that can take lesser known time periods or corners of the world and make them cool, fun, new, and refreshing. feudal Japan would work in an Assassin's Creed game for sure, but I feel like it would start to look like, oh, have I played this? You know what I mean? Or have I been a ninja before? I've been a samurai before. Or I've been a ninja before and I've been a samurai before. So they avoided doing this because they felt it was kind of well-charted territory and that making one in Japan would just be too boring, which is ridiculous, but here we are today with them actually doing that. Like you take that into consideration, and it's like you had a bunch of games that came out from whether playing as a samurai or playing as a ninja, and those always did pretty well. And you guys could have done something to make yourself stand out for making a game about an Assassin's Creed game that takes place in Japan. But they refused to do that because the heads of their own asses, so to speak, which is a common trope when it comes to Ubisoft these days, especially. But yeah, that's the answer to that question about why it took them so long to get to this point. It's because they believed for the longest time they didn't need to, and that it would be too boring if they did. Anyways, but there's more. This story continues. I'm going to try to speed this up because I got way more to talk about, and I don't want to spend too much time doing this. But some people speculated why they changed the protagonist in the first place. And whatever, I'll just let this speak for itself. Honestly, I'll let this speak for itself.
They said that Ubisoft was heavily influenced by the socio-political events of the time, with stuff like, and no, I'm not kidding, George Floyd dying, the riots, and Black Lives Matter exploding in support. They said that Ubisoft was heavily...
Now, I'm still deciding whether or not I actually fully believe this, but when you really take a minute to step back and think about it, this makes a lot of sense. When you consider the strange shift that has happened since 2020 in all entertainment, not just video games, in that regard, where you start to see more black people being put into positions of leading roles in all forms of entertainment. But I cannot stress, and whatever, I'll just say it. Just the idea that this could be true alone. As a black person, that is infuriating to me. Just to hear that is fucking infuriating to me. I would go into why, but that'd be a whole spiel about why that infuriates the shit out of me. Just knowing that could be a possibility. Not even the fact that it actually is the case, but I'm leaning more towards it probably being the case. But that is infuriating to me personally as a black person. Moving on. So there was the whole talk about potentially Ubisoft being bought out by Tencent, or they were looking for somebody to buy out Ubisoft in general. But the rumor has it that Tencent is honestly looking for a way to buy out the entire company. And while it may have sounded like a good idea at first, having someone to finally come in and swoop in and make some significant changes to the company as a whole, Tencent doesn't necessarily have the greatest of reputations. So if this were to happen, I cannot see this as being a overall positive for the company. There are some rumors out there saying that the whole reason why Ubisoft is in this position in the first place is because it was pushed by Tencent, who has some form of control in the company due to being a massive shareholder. And there's a lot of the decisions they made, and that the decision to include Yasuke in Shadows was one that came from Tencent and not Ubisoft themselves, which would imply that Tencent knew about the backlash of this happening when they announced the character Yasuke in the game itself, and they knew that it would overall tank the company and its share price, and that this was a deliberate espionage move to tank the company's share price so that Tencent could swoop in, buy it all up, and maintain full control over the company, effectively poisoning the well deliberately, so to speak. Now, whether or not you believe that, I'll leave that up to you. But tactics like this, especially in business and when it comes to, market and stuff like that, like this isn't new. It is a very hostile, a very volatile and hostile market. And when you take into consideration, and I mentioned this a few weeks back on a different episode, that there were other investors that specifically claimed, this was AJ Investments, I believe, that claimed this in the previous episode, that shareholders were being held hostage by Ubisoft and Tencent. In other words, he was specifically calling out Tencent as well. That kind of lends some form of credence to Tencent being malicious in their intent to tank the company and try to buy it all up themselves. So if this were to happen, I can't imagine a lot of shareholders or other shareholders would be very happy about this, considering what's been going on behind the scenes. However, the idea of the company being improved from the inside does sound plausible, because when this whole buyout thing happened, the share price of Ubisoft saw a significant increase overall. Let me pull that up for you guys real quick. Back when this whole drama kicked off, Ubisoft was looking at a share price of about €11 at the time. And when this whole rumor thing kicked off about the potential buyout of the company, that actually changed. And they saw an increase. I'm going to pull that up here. Hold on. So you guys can see it for yourselves. Let me just full screen this. There we go. So as you can see there, I'm trying to make it a bit bigger for you guys. Let's get in there. So right now it's sitting at €13 per share. And this is over the course of the past few hours, obviously. But if you go over, let's say 5 years. Let's go 5 years. They were sitting, from the highest over the past 5 years at least, they were sitting at like €82 per share. You can see as time has gone on over the years, that has significantly tanked as time has gone on. And when this whole drama kicked off, it had reached an all-time low, as you can see here. As you can see here. But when the news about the buyout happened, it actually increased to about €14 per share. And it's kind of been sitting roughly around that range for the last little bit because of the potential of this whole buyout happening. But that is the only reason why it's seen a jump. Thomas says, I read in Game Reactor that they're having some voice actors and actresses coming back to the booth to do some voice acting in MGS Delta Snake Eater remake. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about. It's not for today's episode. That's not. We'll talk about that later. That's not for today's episode. Let's go ahead and continue. So I guess it's time to really try to drive the whole thing home about this. These videos kind of go on a bit deeper into what's been going on inside the company, and I kind of don't want to go over too much about what's been happening as well, because I don't want to take away from the creators themselves and the videos that they've made. Like, if you want to hear more about some of the crazy and often nefarious misdeeds going on behind the scenes at Ubisoft, I do highly recommend you check out all those videos from Endymion. Like I said, I'll have a link to his channel in the comment section of this podcast. Also, the video from Legendary Drops that happened last week. I do recommend you check out both channels because they've done excellent work in regards to finding out what's been happening behind the scenes at Ubisoft. They've both been talking to developers, and it kind of makes sense for the reason why developers have been reaching out to them. But anyways, like I was going to say. Oh yeah, there was there was a question about whether or not these consultancy firms like Sweet Baby Inc., for example, as an example, and they asked some of the insiders how they felt about those consultancy firms, and I believe at least one of them said that they see these consultancy firms as a plague on the industry, and that they do more to hurt the overall developers and the studios themselves than they do to help. And that's kind of unfortunate because there's a lot of good people at these studios that are just trying to make good games, just want to make great games, and then you have people like this come in and completely poison the well, for lack of a better way to describe it. And you end up making bad games and people pan them and you get a bunch of backlash and no one buys them and the companies tank. And unfortunately, it's the result is the good employees get laid off and lose their jobs, while the higher ups, the people that have brought this upon themselves in the first place, they get a nice cushy windfall and still stay in the company. Like I said, the gaming industry is one of the weirdest places, one of the few industries out there where you can have multiple failures of projects, but yet somehow the higher ups not only stay at these companies, but they also get promoted. They move up. One of the only industries I've ever heard of where you can somehow fail upward. That is insane to me. Absolutely insane. But anyways, much of this corroborates what Legendary Drops talked about in his video. Obviously, he talked to Ubisoft devs as well, and I talked about that in the previous episode. I'll have a link to this channel in the comment section of this video as well. But the overall sentiment from, let's say they talk to different developers or different insiders, but the sentiment seems to be the same. You got a lot of people in there working in positions they shouldn't be in, management completely ignoring employees when they're pushing for something to be changed. Like I mentioned, like what part of the reason why Assassin's Creed Shadows got delayed is because developers have been pushing for this for a while and they've been ignored right up until the controversy started happening about the game. And then they finally said, okay, guys, we'll delay the game. Like it took all of this to happen before the higher-ups finally listened to the developers saying, yo, this ain't happening. Delay the game. It's not coming out. It's going to be a buggy mess by the time it does. What I forgot to mention last week's episode during the Ubisoft section is that there was also a threat of a strike that was going to happen inside the company as well. But when you take into consideration of everything I just talked about, whether it be the incompetence of management, the ignoring of employees, so on and so forth, like, is it really all that surprising that there was a threat to go on strike? Like a lot of these developers are kind of fed up what's been happening at the company. So I'm not surprised that you have quite a few developers on the inside saying, you know what, screw it. I'm going to spill the beans. And they're reaching out to these prominent YouTubers because they feel like they're the only people out there that can basically megaphone what they've been trying to tell the higher ups of the company this entire time. And they see what we're talking about when we call out this stuff. And many of them agree, but they can't say anything and they can't go against the narrative within the companies because they're afraid of not only losing their jobs, but also being blacklisted from the entire industry, which is crazy. Just for having opposing opinions, you could actually nuke your entire career. Like hell, one of the insiders confirmed that if you dare speak out against heavy-handed politics or any sort of agendas, like your career is null and void. You will in fact be blacklisted from the entire industry. Like that is some pretty intense suppression of dissenting opinions. Like there was the whole talk about the toxic positivity claim that, you know, was said to take over studios like Firewalk, the guys who made Concord, and it seems to be the same case here in Ubisoft, where you cannot talk or say or provide some sort of criticism or even feedback that might be seen as negative about the game, because that will be seen as toxic as well. You know, you're not allowed to do that, and you can't provide pushback. You can't say, hey, maybe we should probably pay attention to the gamers or something like that, without you effectively being kicked from the company. Like, remember that? Like, there was a story that came out a while back about one of the studio heads at Firewalk Studios, and one of the most ridiculous things that you could possibly hear come out of that studio was that one of the, I think it was the head of the studio, wanted to be addressed as the professor. And for a minute there, I thought that was kind of ridiculous, up until the game came out and people saw in the credits that there was indeed a credited person by the name of Professor. They found that out. So it wasn't bullshit. Somebody in there had enough narcissistic tendency to want to be addressed as the professor, would not be addressed any other way, and then proceeded to list themselves as the professor in the credits of the game. Unbelievable. But then there's the Yasuke stuff, which, again, I hope it is just speculation about why he was put into the game in the first place. But considering all of the events that happened since then, and looking at the patterns that have happened in all of entertainment since, it's leaning more towards likely being the case. But like I said, just knowing that it's a possibility kind of boils my blood. Then there's the consultancy firms like Sweet Baby Inc. and a bunch of other ones, like people discovered Hit Detection, which is another one of them that worked on the Silent Hill 2 remake. And they've been pointing that out, although in my opinion, that wasn't necessarily news or anything new, because Hit Detection has been out there publicly talking about the studios they were working with. And Bloober Team, the guys who worked on the Silent Hill remake, they made that very clear for months now that they were working with them on that game. So some people say that the whole thing was kind of hidden behind the scenes. It really wasn't when you consider the fact that they had announced they were working with Bloober Team for quite a while now. When you follow that thread all the way back, you see that there were signs of this well in advance. So this wasn't necessarily a hidden thing. But there's a lot of pushback on this stuff because now people are seeing what's happening when these consultancy firms get involved. And that's not to say that this whole thing solely falls on consultancy firms for the reason why games are kind of tanking these days. Like, there has to be a mindset, an overall mindset of the entire studio to even want to reach out to these consultancy firms in the first place. So it's not just the consultancy firms, it's the studios themselves as well. And a lot of the higher-ups that work in the studios that think it's necessary to hire these firms to work on these games. And if anybody inside speaks out against it, well, considering they're the grunts of the company, what does your opinion matter? You're not allowed to talk ill about this. You're not allowed to go against the grain. But a lot of this stuff, like I said in the Ghost of Yote video, it has made the overall gaming community very scrutinizing when it comes to who worked on the games and their history of employment before. And I'll get a little bit into why and how that is manifesting a little bit later. But that's enough about Assassin's Creed, because I get exhausted talking about that game, truth be told. And there's always something new coming out about it, unfortunately. There's always something new coming about it, unfortunately. But I also want to talk about what's been going on with I guess I'll talk about it now then. Let's get into this Halo stuff. So, a little earlier this week, it was announced that 343 was rebranding as Halo Studios. I'll pull out the article here for that. Just give me a second. I got an article here from Eurogamer that talks about this. We'll get into this bad boy in just a moment. Let me pull that up. So, as you can see here, Halo developer 343's Rebrands and confirms multiple new Halo games. And they've moved the engine. The whole big thing about this announcement is them moving the game to Unreal Engine 5, or moving over to Unreal Engine 5 for further development of Halo games. But I'll read. In a surprise announcement last night, the freshly rebranded Halo Studios debuted a first look at Project Foundry. His experimental look at how the flagship Xbox flagship franchise will develop and will look developed in Unreal Engine 5. My bad. All Halo games from here on out will use UE5. Halo Studios confirmed, ditching its own proprietary slipspace engine it toiled on for years. Now, they did kind of show a little bit of a video of this at the same time. There was a 6-minute video they released talking about. Let me get out of this. I hate that. It won't let me move this stuff when I need to move this stuff. So we'll take a look at that for a little bit, and I'll talk a bit about it.
This is Casey Wu, take one. Mark?
I was told that I can just be my authentic self, Chris.
For 6 years, I don't want to be in front of a camera.
There's so much to do and so much fun to be had when you play Halo that I feel like I never run out of things to do.
I love intricate stories that take place across lots of different...
Now, I just want to stop this and say, people, like I said about the whole being much more scrutinizing about the people that are working on games these days. Well, when this whole announcement happened about 343 rebranding as Halo Studios, this video came out and a lot of people decided to do some investigating behind some of the staff they showed in this video. The one, Melissa Boone here, being one of those people. And they found that when it comes to her credentials about her career, when it comes to video games, is that she is now the chief of staff at Halo Studios, but her history in terms of employment and in terms of her career really doesn't have a whole lot of game development history behind it. And it's one of those things that I talk about when I go back to the idea that people working on projects that they shouldn't be working on because they have no experience working on projects. And not only are they working on said projects, but they also have pretty significant positions on said projects. Now, the chief of staff more than likely isn't working on the game itself, right? But they do have some sort of dictation or control over the people that they hire to work on said game. And people dug into her history specifically and her profile when it comes to Xbox in general, because Xbox typically has profiles on much of its employees. Well, they found a bunch of stuff that signifies as, well, like I mentioned earlier, the red flags of what people call as, quote unquote, woke. And one of those things was obviously the pronouns in the bio, but also she talked about, representation for, minority groups. And one of the terms she used to describe one of them is for the Latino community. And this is becoming a common thing, especially in the California development space, by calling Latinos Latinx or Latinx. And from what I've seen, at least from my Latino friends, and from what I'm seeing, is that this seems to be a corroborated issue amongst many other Latinos and people who actually have Latino friends as well, is that my Latino friends, at least, they fucking hate the term Latinx or Latinx. They despise it. And from other people who have talked about it as well, other Latinos and other people who have Latino friends, they all seem to agree. They all fucking hate the term Latinx or Latinx or whatever you want to call it. They hate it, but they keep trying to push it. So a whole bunch of red flags that the people are concerned about. But take all the red flags about the thing being woke aside. When you look at Halo's history, or 343's history, when it comes to Halo, they haven't really had any particular winners in terms of their releases. Halo 4 was okay, but when things started kind of going downhill was right around the Halo 4 era, leading all the way up to Halo Infinite. And the question is, what is the point of rebranding yourself as a new studio when many of the people that worked on some of the least favored games in the franchise are still working at said studio? You can rebrand yourself all you want to, but if you're still cranking out bad games, the people that have helped crank out bad games are still working there, what's the point? But anyways, let's continue. Some people believe that the reason why this is happening in the first place is because they're hoping that the easier development for Halo with Unreal Engine 5 allows them to be able to better port games to other platforms. And if we remember from the beginning, there was a rumor that came out about them working on a new Halo title that might potentially be put on the PlayStation as well. That was the rumor. It was supposed to be a Halo reboot or a remake of Combat Evolved. Looking at the video and some of the footage that they showed in terms of the game, let me just mute that real quick. You look at some of the footage of the game, it does kind of imply that that they've recreated a lot of the assets from the second mission in the first Halo game, which I don't know why I keep forgetting the name of that mission. Like it always keeps escaping me for some reason. I don't know why, but I remember the mission, but the name always keeps escaping me. But many of the assets here in the environment are almost like a recreation of that particular environment in the first game. So it leads one to believe that they're aiming to remake the first Halo game, which sounds great on paper. When you consider the studio behind it, having their experience with games like Halo Infinite, it's not much of a positive thing, at least in my opinion. Consider myself not convinced, right? They talk about this idea of this whole thing being a project called The Foundry. And that The Foundry is not necessarily a game itself. As you can see, it says Project Foundry is not a new game per se, more of an advanced tech demo. Still a 6-minute video company post made it clear that the quality also shows it's fully representative of what an Unreal Engine 5 Halo game could look like, and indeed parts of Project Foundry could pop up in future projects. Which that part here, Project Foundry could pop up in future projects, makes a lot of sense because, like I said, a lot of the assets they're showing here are stuff that could be used in the remake of the first Halo game. And then when you look at things like the Chief's armor towards the end of this thing, come on, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? There we go. This armor here is the armor he wears in the first Halo game. This is the Mjolnir armor Mark 6 or Mark 5. Mark 5. Mark 5 is the one you see in the first Halo game. And this is pretty much a recreation of that exact armor. You wouldn't go out of your way to remake that armor just for the sole purpose of saying, "Oh, look, we just made this armor." Like, no, they're doing this because they're trying to get back into the mindset of making the first Halo game. So you'll probably be seeing something like this, maybe a heavier edited version, and whatever remake it is they're working on. Again, that all sounds exciting when you look at it from a holistic perspective. When you dig into it and realize the studio that's working on it and their track record, it doesn't really set a positive precedent. At least not to me anyways. Also go Advancy. So consider me cautiously optimistic about this thing as well. haven't completely written it off, but when you consider the history of the company itself, consider their project they've released and how it's been marketed poorly, or not marketed poorly, but received poorly for the most part. Not necessarily saying that they're just all out bad games, but the reception hasn't been as great as it could have been. Yeah, this doesn't really this doesn't instill any confidence in me whatsoever as a massive Halo fan. And in the video, they talk about, the things that make Halo great to begin with, which is crazy that there's a lot of talk about this stuff. And they talked about this stuff during the development of Halo Infinite as well. It's like there's a lot of talk about this whole thing of what made Halo great, when the reality is that it's not that complicated at all. For example, I've been playing, me and a good friend of mine, for those of you in the community, you know who she is. We've been playing all throughout the Halo series, once again for the second time, and we've been live streaming that, which you can check out on my channel now. I have a whole archive of us playing everything from Halo 1 all the way up to Halo Infinite so far. And with her having this new experience, because before this, she had never played Halo before. She had gotten bits and pieces, but she really wanted to play the entire series because she never had before. With that experience under her belt, and then coming to Halo Infinite, she is now starting to understand why people generally don't really care for Halo Infinite that much. She now has that experience under her belt where people are talking about that. And now seeing this, I do kind of wonder how she feels about this as well. This idea or this premise of the game, of a remake of the first game being made by the studio that makes Halo Infinite, a game that she is having a good time playing with me, but she even said herself that she probably wouldn't see herself playing that game by herself. And honestly, I don't blame her. So I would like to be excited for this, but it is definitely difficult to do. Like, the visuals look great. I mean, obviously it's being made in Unreal Engine 5, which is, from a visual perspective, is a fantastic looking engine. I mean, it was the game that was powering games like Black Myth Wukong and the now released Silent Hill remake. I think it's also powering Sparking Zero. I could be wrong about that, but I do think it's either Unreal Engine 4 or Unreal Engine 5. I think it's UE5 that's powering Sparking Zero as well. So it makes some great looking games, but there's also the component of whether or not the game is properly optimized. And besides Sparking Zero, the last couple of games like Black Myth and Silent Hill 2, like, not great in terms of the optimization department for sure. But hopefully they'll have that worked out by the time it comes out. But we'll see. Like, I'm not completely writing this off as a lost cause, but I will be watching its progress and seeing what it is. Like, this whole idea of what makes Halo great is not as complicated as a lot of these studios are trying to make it be. And whatever. I'll get into why that is the case in our next article that we talk about here. So let's move on to that. So this week there was an article by IGN talking to developers of Space Marine 2 about why it is that big budget games are failing. And the COO, their chief operating officer, Tim Willits from Saber Interactive, says, well, in his opinion, is that teams are overscoping their projects. We go down here. Says this week, this is the Tim Sweeney thing. This article's kind of all over the place when it comes to who they talk to. But anyways, says down here in the middle, for Space Marine 2, Willits explained, Saber made sure to nail the core combat and kept a handle on the scope of the game. So much so that some had praised it for rekindling memories of Xbox 360 era of action games. He says, it is not necessarily the genre that has moved on because great games will always do well, Willits insisted. One of the things that we try to do at Saber, and this is part of my job as creative officer of all teams, we have a core belief that what you do every second and what happens when you push these buttons and the core gameplay loop is so crucial. So we focus on the moment-to-moment interaction in the gameplay and the feeling you have. And then we adhere to our core pillars, like be the ultimate Space Marine, melee, range, swarms, that's it. And a lot of teams throughout development will overscope games. They look at some other game that just came out and say, oh, we got to do that. Let's add this. We got to do this. And then lose focus on the core, what actually makes the game fun. We are not in Space Marine 2 doing things that, well, the swarms are new technology, but there isn't some revolutionary new game mechanic that no one's ever seen before. There are gameplay mechanics that people are familiar with, but we do it really, really well. And we execute really, really well. In other words, he's saying, like, listen, you don't necessarily have to have a million different things in your games or a million different mechanics in your games. Sometimes you just got to focus on the core mechanic of your game and do that really, really well. Space Marine 2 is not some revolutionary game that came out. It's not flipping the script on the game industry. It's not changing the way we play games. And honestly, it didn't need to. It just needed to nail what made people like that first game to begin with. And it did that. And it sold really well. Now, you could say part of that is due to the fact that it's a Warhammer IP. And Warhammer is a very popular IP, which is true to an extent, because one of the issues with that argument is that a lot of Warhammer games have come out and they haven't sold nearly as well as Space Marine 2 has. So that argument holds to a certain extent, but it doesn't explain all the other games that have come out under the Warhammer IP that hasn't sold anywhere, or at least a 40K IP that hasn't sold nearly as well as Space Marine 2 did. But they nailed the basic mechanics. Like, in the same vein, because some of these people that worked on Space Marine 2 have also worked on Halo way back in the Bungie days. And one of the common things they keep saying is that you don't have to make your games overly complicated. When the CEO let that comment under Asmongold's video, he talked about how, you know, a lot of modern games are overly complex for no reason. It requires too much of an investment. He was like, you know, we just wanted to make a game that's fun to play and addicting. Simple. And that can be applied to Halo as well. Halo is not a complicated game. It's a first-person shooter. You pick up a gun, you shoot aliens in the face. That's all there is to it. And for some reason, many people have thousands of hours in campaign and multiplayer of all of these games just playing it because of simple mechanics. You look at a game like Call of Duty, for example, one of the most popular video game franchises in the world that still sells millions of copies every year. Are those games overly complicated? No. You pick up a gun, you shoot the enemy in the face, or you shoot another player in the face. It's simple. But it's a simple mechanic that's also incredibly addicting. It's time-tested. A lot of these games will come out trying to do things that other developers have done because it's a popular thing to do. And they try to be this so-called jack of all trades thing. And the thing about jack of all trades is jack of all trades can be average to somewhat decent at everything, but not amazing at anything. So you end up with this game that's overall pretty average all around because it's trying to do a bunch of new things. It's trying to be revolutionary, but the thing that people have to engage with the most is not very good because you've stretched yourself so thin across many different aspects of your gameplay that the core gameplay tenets themselves aren't that great. Instead of focusing on one core and making that really good, and once you've nailed that, once you've mastered that, then you can start layering other stuff on top of that. Like I imagine whenever Space Marine 3 comes out, so long as they've nailed and mastered the core gameplay mechanics, I can imagine you'll probably see a lot more new mechanics added on top of that. Like Tim Willits, and by the way, Tim Willits actually used to work at id Software, way in Bethesda. This was way back in the Doom era days. He's been there. He was at Bethesda for quite some time. And one of the games he worked on was Doom 2016, and then the other was Doom Eternal. When you look at those games, there is nothing complicated about either of those games. You pick up a gun, you shoot demons in the face, you get some glory kills, you get your health back. And that mechanic holds true over Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. Both games carry that same mechanic. And both of those games are incredibly addicting. I cannot tell you how many hours I have logged in Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. Not because the gameplay is complicated. It's not. You know how to point a gun at a demon and shoot it in the face, right? Nothing more to it. And it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. Those games went on to be some of the best games of those years. Doom 2016 was my favorite game of 2016. Sometimes it just takes you nailing a core mechanic and doing it really, really well. And it's funny because when you look at Space Marine 2, hell, even the first Space Marine, like the first Space Marine had a mechanic where in order for you to get your health back, you had to do executions on your enemies. Similar to that of Doom 2016. In order for you to get health back and stuff like that, you do executions on your enemies. So it's like, And I kind of wonder, like, did Doom 2016 kind of borrow that mechanic from the first Space Marine? But the irony of that is that the guy who worked on Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal is now working on Space Marine 2, which has the same mechanic. And as Nancy says in the chat, simplicity is needed sometimes, which it really is. Like, some of the most time-tested and addicting games that have lasted for decades are some of the most simple experiences. Again, that's not to say that the more complicated and intricate experiences don't need to exist, or that they're not fun, or that they're not important. But you can tell which ones have lasted all this time, and for good reason. Like, you look at a game like Mario, for example. That game, like, the overall mechanics of a Mario game are incredibly simple, because they market those games towards kids. Yet somehow you find adults playing them, you find kids playing them, and those mechanics, they haven't really changed all that much. Like, they've added new things to the 3D Marios over time, like Mario Odyssey with the whole with the cappy mechanic, being able to possess other enemies. But for the most part, the idea of being able to jump on your opponents and kill them, that still holds true. That still holds true. And the overall premise of Mario Odyssey is the same as Mario Sunshine, is the same as Mario Galaxy, is the same as Mario 64. Whether you're gathering stars, whether you're gathering shine sprites, whether you're gathering moons, the premise is still the same. And yet these games are some of the most beloved games in the series. The mechanics aren't complicated. They're actually quite simple. It's that they nail them and do them really, really well. When you focus on that, then you don't have to spend so much money on all these other mechanics or ballooning your game out to this massive open world, because it's not necessary. Like, a lot of people made the argument that they wanted to see the sequel to Black Myth Wukong be open world. And I'm thinking to myself, why? For what purpose? Especially when people were already getting lost in the linear experience, because it was so, I guess you could say, wide. Like, the game is much of a wide linear game and not necessarily open world, but people were still getting lost with that. Like, it doesn't need, like, not every game needs to be open world. And when the complaints about the games costing too much to make comes into play, you don't think making a game large and open like that doesn't cost extra money? Because it does. And more development time. You need more staff. Go back to the article as I continue on. It says there's a question of the cost of development, which pretty much every AAA publisher has said has risen sharply once again with the launch of the latest generation of consoles. Development costs, well, it said, has got so out of control that some AAA games, especially those in the U.S. states, such as California, now have unreasonable sales expectations set against their budgets. Saber insisted develop Space Marine 2 affordably with a budget less than half of Doom Eternal. Remember that thing I said about him working on Doom Eternal? Space Marine 2 was made with half that budget. The last game Willits worked on, Doom Eternal was the last game that he worked on while he was the boss of id Software after leaving to join Saber in 2019. He said, "We don't need to sell 4 million units to make Space Marine 2 a success. There are many games, sadly, especially in North American developers, where if you do not sell 5 million copies, you are a failure. I mean, what business are we in where you fail if you sell less than 5 million?" Which is true. I'll continue. There are examples like that, and we do not want to be that business. We want to be a developer that focuses on the core experience, that makes the games actually fun, and then do it really well, and then make it affordably. It says, look at SnowRunner. Dude, SnowRunner is literally driving trucks through mud. That's it. I'm done. I just described the game. 15 million people played it because the experience is perfect. Look at World War Z. Like, come on. We're not going to get an Academy Award for that game, but 25 million people have played it because it's just this perfectness. This perfectness. And that's what we do well. Of course, he listed all the games that Saber and Focus have published and worked on. Of course, he's going to show the games that the company actually made and worked on, which is obvious, right? But his point still stands. Like, they don't have to be these award-winning mechanics in games that are super complicated to be good. If you perfect what you've made and made it really fun to play, that's kind of all you need. You don't have to spend that much money on that. Like, I was looking at when I read this article, I went looking into the issue with Final Fantasy and why Square was disappointed with Final Fantasy sales. And so I can pull up that stat I had real quick. because I was looking around for this and I couldn't find any info, so I ended up having to talk to AI about this particular issue. So hold on. I had asked, how much was the budget of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth? Let me pull that up in just a second here, folks. Yeah, here we go. Here we go. Okay. Let me put that on screen for you guys so you can see that too. Boom. Boom. All right. Let's full screen that. And then we'll enlarge it so you can see it too. So, development costs. They said development costs of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, not publicly disclosed. However, estimates range from $150 million to $200 million, including marketing expenses. Marketing budget. A reported figure of $140 to $144 million is mentioned in one search result, placing it among the most expensive games to make. So, ranging between $150 to $200 million, with the possibility of part of that being, significantly for marketing costs. Now, someone kind of did the math on this, and they said, okay, say Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is like $70 per sale, right? But obviously, these publishers, they don't get the full amount of money from every sale. Let's say they make $30 off of each sale of the game. Then in order for them to make back the money they spent on that, just to break even, okay? Not to make profit, but to make even, just to break even off of that. They would have to sell, let me see. Let's try $5 billion. Yeah. They would have to sell between 5 and 6 million copies just to break even for the amount of money they spent on the game. Not to make a profit, to break even. Obviously, a company doesn't sustain itself by breaking even all the time. You have to profit. So, in order to do that, in order for them to not only break even, but also profit the amount of money that they spent making the game, they would have to sell damn near 12 million copies. So when people say that their expectations for sales are unrealistic in the sense that there's not enough people to buy the games, sure, but they're not unrealistic in terms of making the money back they spent and then trying to make the profit they need to maintain a business. And one of the issues with this is that, and this was mentioned in one of the Ubisoft Insider videos from, I think it was from Endymion. One of the insiders said that the industry has kind of reached a bit of a plateau. It's bottomed out in terms of the amount of money it can make now. There's this constant idea that they're going to somehow reach this mythical audience that they haven't found yet, and suddenly get into this windfall of money that doesn't exist. Like, the audience for video games right now is the audience for video games. You're always going to find a specific set of people that are ready to play your game. But you're not going to magically pull this audience out of your ass overnight. It's not just going to magically poof into existence when it doesn't exist. So you have these overscoped games, these over-budgeted games that cost an arm and a leg to make with a general audience size that there's just not enough of to make the money back. Like, 2 million sales is a lot of copies. You tell somebody that a game sold 2 million copies, that sounds fantastic, right? But then you hear about the amount of money they spent to make the game, and that's a drop in the bucket. Like, I did some more research about Final Fantasy 16 and about why they were upset about that game. From what I understand, and again, this is partially speculation for the most part, but I looked into that, and Final Fantasy 16 cost roughly, I think it was like roughly 60 million in development costs to make, with marketing being another 30 million, which will bring it to roughly around 90 million in total for that entire game. From the development cost to the marketing, like, $90 million for the entirety of that game and what it is. Again, you factor into the part where the game sold 3 million copies in its first week. And keep in mind, the game was exclusive to PlayStation. This is before it hit PC. All right. So if they're making $30 off of each copy and they sold 3 million copies, that would put them at, we do the math here. Yeah. So in other words, they only broke even for that game in the first week. Now, if anybody knows the patterns when it comes to game launches and how games sell after launches happen, they're not making another 3 million the next week over. Like, that's usually when sales tend to slow down after that first week, which is why the first week of sales for video games are so important, because that's the best time, the hottest point for you to make all the sales you need to make off of a game. They managed to break even with 3 million. But in order for them to really make that money back, all of it, including marketing, they would have had to sell roughly 6 million or higher. So it sounds ridiculous at first when you hear their expectations, but when you think about the amount of money they spent on these games and what it takes to break even and then make profit, it's not that outlandish for those expectations. The problem is that there's just not enough people out there to guarantee those sales numbers. In terms of making that money back, the expectation is reasonable. But in terms of audience, to help them bring that money back or make that money back, it ain't going to happen. There is a absolute limit to the amount of audience you could bring into a game. While you seem to find it to be limitless with the amount of money you spend to make a game, the audience out there that you can make money from to make that money back, that's got a limit. It's got a limit, and it always will have a limit. So until they get that through their heads, until they start, and especially, and until they stop attacking gamers for being tired of the heavy-handed politics in their video games and them constantly saying that they're evil for being a gamer, or how in Hit Detection's case, one of the people at Hit Detections kept saying that the world would be a better place without gamers. Like, you keep saying shit like that. All you're doing is giving people fuel to not buy games and to never buy yours or anything you touch. And for a company, that is a fucking death sentence. This is like, what? Yeah. There's a consultancy firm called Hit Detection. Very similar to that of Sweet Baby Inc. And I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier in the podcast. But they also worked on the Silent Hill 2 remake. And one of the heads of said studio has been out there with the history saying that the world would be a better place if gamers weren't around. I'm not going to pull that tweet up. It's out there. You can find it. I'm not going to pull that up. Or you should, you know what? Maybe I will. For the sake of this podcast, maybe I will pull that up. Hold on. Just so that I don't sound like a crazy person when talking about this stuff, I'll pull it up. If I'm going to do this, then I better go all the way, right? Here we go. Let me show that on screen. This is from thatparkplace.com. The article title: Silent Hill 2 remake consultant suggested the world will be better without gamers. And if we go down here, they also revealed the fact that they worked on the Silent Hill 2 remake, because you can see their name in the credits, and his name specifically, Jacob Geller, is in the credits. But in a previous tweet, way back in 2019, it's in the article. It is, yeah. You see down here, there's actual proof. And again, you get into that point of like digging up old tweets of people on Twitter, which, you know, that is already a contentious issue as it is. But in a time period where people have been doing that shit to others for the longest time, like, it was only a matter of time before the pendulum swung the other way and people started doing it to you. But anyways, This tweet here that says they were responding to a different tweet back then. It said the previous tweet was, or the quote tweet was, "I'm curious, what's the dumbest idea you have that you nevertheless believe will, if implemented, make the world a better place?" And he basically just said, "No gamers." What's the dumbest idea you have that you nevertheless believe will, if implemented, make the world a better place? No gamers. And they also worked on Silent Hill 2 Remake. Now, from what I've seen, the Silent Hill 2 Remake has been positively received. And it's sold, and from what I've seen, it's also sold relatively well in its first week. And the early access stuff as well. But, man, I think most of that is partly due to, well, not most of that. Like, some of that might be partly due to the fact that they've kind of hid the whole thing of them being associated with the game. But I use hid in quotes because them working on the game wasn't exactly a hidden thing. Like, they announced they were working with Bloober Team way back many months ago. They had announced that they were already working with Bloober Team, that they're working with Remedy and all that fun stuff too. So it wasn't exactly a hidden thing that they had some association with this game. Consider. This is why do people say the dumbest shit, because it's the internet. People like no filter. Absolutely no filter. When you go through a period of time thinking that shit won't be used against you, when you've had no problem using shit like that against other people, and then it comes back to bite you in the ass, like, man, it's a karma thing. In my opinion, it's a karma thing. In my opinion, it's a karma thing, but you know, it is what it is. I'm not understanding that you should go around and cancel this person or attack this person. Like I always say, like I say, just don't even bother with these people because it's not worth it. Don't interact with these people. Don't bother talking to these people because it's not worth your time. You see them for what they are. Look at their actions, see for what they are, and you avoid them like the plague. Before I end today's episode, there was talk about the resurgence of Concord. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. People have the rumor is that Concord might be making a comeback. There's a reason why people are saying that. People have looked at Concord's SteamDB page under the update history section of said SteamDB page, and they noticed that for the past week or so, the game behind the scenes has been receiving significant updates and changes. We're talking from yesterday all the way through every day. From yesterday all the way up to, this one goes all the way to September, I think. Yeah, this goes all the way to September 30th. Last month, this game's been receiving updates behind the scenes. Which leaves one to speculate, like if the game has been shut down and if they were done with it, then why is it seeing so many updates behind the scenes? And people are speculating that the reason why it's seeing all these updates is because they intend to relaunch the game with a new free-to-play model. Now, some folks say that that's impossible. They wouldn't do that. That'd be crazy to do that. But no, they're not crazy to do that. In fact, that might have been the plan since the game shut down. And the reason why I say that is because when the game did shut down, they put out this post. And I'll read. Concord fans, we've been listening closely to your feedback since the launch of Concord on PlayStation 5 and PC. We want to thank everyone who has joined the journey aboard the North Star. Your support and the passionate community that has grown around the game has meant the world to us. However, while many qualities of the experience resonate with players, what players? We also recognize the other aspect of the game. Our initial launch didn't land the way we intended. Therefore, at this time, we decided to take the game offline beginning September 6, 2024, and explore options, including those that will better reach our players. While we determine the best path ahead, Concord sales will cease immediately, and we will begin to offer a full refund for all gamers who have purchased the game for PS5 and PC. Steam Store will refund players who bought the game over the coming days. Steam will send confirmation of the refund once it has been processed. Once refunded players will no longer have access to the game. We'll keep you updated, and thank you again to all the free gunners who have joined us in the Concord Galaxy. That little part right here where I'm highlighted. Therefore, at this time, we decided to take the game offline beginning September 6th and explore options, including those that will better reach our players. In other words, this isn't the idea of them bringing the game back as a free-to-play thing. Not so far-fetched, because their announcement on the day that they were shutting the thing down, they kind of left the door open for that. So while people are saying it doesn't seem likely, I argue it seems very likely that this thing is going to resurface, because it was clear they hadn't given up on it when the game shut down. Now the question is, will a free-to-play version of Concord be enough to save it? Because while the $40 price tag of the game definitely hurt it in that aspect, it wasn't the sole reason why people didn't give a shit about the game. And it certainly wasn't the only reason. So if you didn't change any of those other aspects that people didn't care for about the game, then you putting it out as free to play, like, sure, you might see a bump for those who avoided playing the game because they didn't want to spend money on it, but will that be enough to actually save the game? And maybe, who knows, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it will be enough. And I think it would totally destroy the people at this studio if that game failed a second time. So we'll see. I mean, it's a bold choice to do this. It's very bold for them to try to pull this off. But I'm not surprised they're attempting this, because they left the door open for this to be a possibility in the future. And with the amount of updates that have been happening behind the scenes with that game ever since it shut down, and I'm talking significant updates behind the scenes, every day since September 30th. Well over a week. This thing has been seeing updates. I would not be surprised if you see this thing resurface again as a free-to-play model. And even more so, that it could receive a free-to-play version right around the time when the secret level episode for Concord airs on Amazon. I guess that would be the perfect time to do it. You have the episode air, people watch it, and they'd be like, oh, by the way, the game is back, free to play. Check it out. Did you like that episode? Well, check out the game. That will be the time to do it. So be prepared, folks. You might be seeing Concord coming back in a big way real soon. Can't say I'm excited for it. Didn't care for it. Didn't care for it when it was in like a free open beta mode. Didn't play it then. And won't intend to play it when it's free to play. Vinci says, who knew? Yeah. Like the people that didn't care for it then are not going to care for it now. So I don't see this saving the game, unfortunately. Maybe they'll make some kind of money off of like a free to play microtransaction model, but we'll see. Like, I don't even know if that'll be enough. If there was enough time between the game shutting down and now to even put it out as a free to play thing. Like, you're just going to you already have like microtransactions set and ready to go for the game? Was that already a thing? I don't know. We'll see. But all right, I think that's all I got for now. I was going to go into some other info, but I was still trying to catch up on a lot of stuff I wanted to talk about in the previous episode and just never got a chance to get around to it, unfortunately. There was this whole thing about the developer of Moon Studios and a journalist from Kotaku going at it, but maybe I'll save that for another time. There's not a whole lot of big news with that one. It was just like this. Don't like talking about this chick because she has been a total blight in terms of the gaming media and just video games in general. And one of the most like ardent and annoying advocates for Sweet Baby Inc. and consultancy firms that you could possibly find. But she has a history of attacking not only gamers but also developers. And she goes by the name of Alyssa Mercante. She works at Kotaku. She's a journalist. People make fun of her, saying that she's a blogger at Kotaku because she's definitely not a journalist. She has no degree in that shit. But anyways, there was an exchange between her and the head of Moon Studios, Thomas Mahler, who worked on games like Ori and the Blind Forest, both games in the Ori series, and then the upcoming No Rest for the Wicked game, which also looks pretty cool. But basically what happened was, and this is me summing it up. Basically what happened was is that there was a, I guess, developer, quote unquote, who had claimed that who kind of went on a tirade on Twitter talking about how people got the whole thing about consultancy and DEI wrong. And she went on a whole Twitter thread about that. And then she went on, and then once she started getting a bunch of eyes on her thread, she decided to advertise who she was and the games she worked on. And one of those games she claimed she worked on was Ori and the Blind Forest. Well, the studio head said, who are you? Because I don't recall. I can find that article here. Hold on. Yeah, he said, here we go, right here. He says, I'm the director of both Ori games, and I don't know who you are. How are you affiliated with Ori? Because she went ahead and she posted this to as soon as she had worked on both Ori and the Blind Forest, and I forgot whatever this game is, but she made that assumption. And the head of the studio who worked on that game was like, I don't know who you are. Who the fuck? Why are you making these claims? And she goes, I worked with Xbox User Research. I was the URA for global publishing during 2018 and 2020. Nice to meet you. And he goes, I can explain it. I didn't want to cause you any trouble. I just saw you posting that you worked on Ori, and I had no idea who you were. Since you're calling people names online, which she was, I thought it was important to inform people that you never actually worked for Moon Studios and that you didn't ever directly engage with anyone at Moon. Always be nice to people, Ray, even those you disagree with. So basically, he called her out. He was like, you're out here calling people's names and then trying to say that you're associated with our studio when you weren't. Which, in my opinion, he was right to do this to distance himself from somebody who was out there basically being a shithead, for lack of a better way to describe it. And the last thing you want as a company is to have yourself associated with people out there that are being just bad people overall. So he was basically trying to distance himself and his company from this person by being like, yo, you didn't work for us. We don't know you. But of course, Alyssa, being the attention whore that she is, she decided to call him a dickhead in response. And his response is, I don't know who you were. I don't know who you are. And she goes, maybe you've forgotten. And she pulls up this old article from 2022 about people from the inside of Moon Studios trying to expose how awful Mahler was at the company. And in his response, he kind of went on a big thread about, game development and how he was like, yeah, he was guilty in some of that stuff that happened back then. But, in his opinion, as the head of the studio, it's kind of his job to try to rein people in and be the final decision maker when it comes to making choices about where the games are going in the studio. And that he was disappointed that there were people out there who used to work for Moon Studio that were talking badly about the company behind his back. And that he was like, you know what? But in that case, like, those people really weren't meant for the company to begin with. And of course, she had responded after that with too long didn't read, even though we know for a fact that she did in fact read it. Anybody who responds with too long didn't read, they definitely read it. They just wanted to be shitheads. They read it. They just didn't have a response. So that's kind of that whole drama to begin with. It's not really a big thing, but that's kind of the whole thing to begin with. But just be mindful that whenever you see this person by the name of Alyssa Mercante out there, or anything associated with Kotaku, you get an idea of the kind of people you're dealing with. And I'm happy to see that there's developers out there that are seeing this shit for what it is and calling it out. Even developers are kind of tired of Kotaku shit. And this guy, like, I'm pretty sure back when this whole thing kicked off about people kind of pushing back on the DEI shit and the consultancy firm shit and the quote unquote woke stuff, he was like one of the few developers out there who didn't necessarily agree entirely with everyone in regards to pushing back against this stuff. But he was one of the ones out there who was like, you know what? I may not agree with everything in regards to what's happening right now, but I don't think it's a good idea to write all of gamers off as being crazy because of this. There is some truth to what they're saying. He was one of the few developers out there that said, yo, listen, maybe we should probably take some time to listen to what they're saying. And of course, he got attacked for that by the crazies on the internet because that's what happens. You will always get attacked by those who want you to go along with the narrative. And if you ever go against the grain, you're going to get people to come after you. And that's what happened to him. So, but it is good to know there's some developers out there that actually have a level head about this shit. And he wasn't being mean to her at all. He didn't call her names. He didn't say, call her crazy, anything like that. He was just like, I don't know who you are. Like, did you work for us? Like, you're out here calling people names, but you didn't work for us. I don't know who you are. Like, I directed both of these games, and I'd never heard of you. So yeah, that's what the whole situation is. Not that big of a deal, but I guess I should probably touch on it anyways, just in case. All right, that's all I got for now, guys. This one got long in the tooth as well, but I was trying to make up for the lack of a podcast last week. So if you want to catch this thing from the beginning, you can go back and watch the VOD. But there's a whole bunch of news that's still coming out, and I'll probably start next week and trying to make some more short form content to talk about some of these topics as well, because stuff just keeps happening constantly. For a while there, I thought like I would never have enough news to talk about for these episodes, but there's always some shit going down every week, to the point where you probably have something to talk about nearly every day in regards to this industry, because there's always some drama of some form happening somewhere, and it's ridiculous. All right, that's it for now, guys. Thank you all for watching. Let me go back to this page here as I do my outro. Again, you guys can find me on social media. Find me on Twitter, Discord, YouTube, obviously, for those that are watching there. You can find those links in the description. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find them in the banners below if you're watching on Twitch. I'll see if I can try to break some of this out into smaller bits, depending on how I feel about it. I don't know. It all depends on how I feel about the episode that determines whether or not I break some of this stuff out into smaller content. Oh, yeah. I did want to talk a little bit about the Ghost of Yote video that I worked on as well. That was a fun one. Like, I made that. So when I talked about Ghost of Yote in the previous episode, I already knew that it was going to be a contentious topic to begin with. When I made the clips of that episode, there's a reason why I saved that one for last between the two that I uploaded, between Assassin's Creed and that one, because I knew it was going to be a contentious topic, to which it was. I knew it was going to be mixed, and based on the I guess the like to dislike ratio, which overall has been more likes than dislikes, it's been mixed. And I understand where it's coming from, because a lot of people out there really enjoyed that first game, Ghost of Tsushima. And they want to hold on to that level of optimism that Yote won't have any of the shit that people are concerned about. And I get that. I definitely do. But like I said, pattern recognition is a hell of a thing. And people are noticing patterns. And we've gotten to the point now that they've seen the patterns so much, and that they've been let down so much and disappointed so much, that now everyone is hypersensitive to this shit. Where if someone even breathes or looks like they might have what many would describe as woke red flags, quote unquote, in them, they're writing it off, or they're heavily skeptical. And I can't say they're wrong for doing that, for feeling that way. Like, how many times do you burn someone before they're practically done with your shit? And there's a lot of people out there that are just sick of it. And I can't say they're wrong. So they look at Ghost of Yote, and they see the female character there, and they think, well, shit, they're already going the woke route because they put a female character there. And it's not to say that they, quote unquote, hate strong female characters, or that they're tired of women in lead roles of games. It's the fact that in so many cases, a lot of cases, that when you see that happen, it always comes with some sort of political messaging behind it that's always demeaning to the other side. And there's only so long you can talk down to people before they write you off as crazy or sick of your shit and don't want anything to do with you anymore. So there's a lot of people out there that just aren't going to give this game a chance. And again, I can't say they're wrong. Like, there are people out there that have been pointing this shit out for years. I'm talking way longer than most of us even know about. For me, I didn't know about the whole consultancy firm Sweet Baby Inc. thing until Alan Wake 2 happened. And when I was thoroughly disappointed with that game overall. I didn't know Sweet Baby Inc. who Sweet Baby Inc. was or what they did until that happened. And then what led me down the rabbit hole of investigating who they were and what they did was Suicide Squad. And that's when the whole thing kind of reached critical mass, so to speak. But there are people out there that have been fighting this shit for years, pointing this stuff out for the longest time, saying like, yo, this is what's happening behind the scenes. This is what's going on. And for the most part, everyone wrote them off as crazy. Conspiracy theorists, oh, it's not happening. That's not true. You're crazy. Oh, you just hate minorities, or you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're a transphobe. They got labeled everything in the book just for pointing this stuff out. And I kind of applaud them for not basically putting a big "I told you so" on every page now that this stuff has been proven to be true. So I can understand when you're just kind of done. You've been fighting this fight for years, got called crazy, and then when it actually happens, people are like, "Oh my God, how did this happen? When did this happen? How did we get to this point?" They were like, it's like, motherfucker, I've been telling you shit for ages. So I can't blame them for being pissed off about it and being like, "No, I'm done." Like, just me putting out that video, that one little clip from the podcast had people coming after me saying that I was a bigot or a xenophobe, and that I was upset because, oh, well, women exist. It's like, so what? Yeah, they do. Or I should have said, wait, they do? Question mark. Like, I had people try to come after me, just come after me for that for that clip in the comments. Which I'm not surprised about because I knew that was going to happen. Like, again, when I put that video out, I knew it was going to be contentious. I knew I was going to have people coming after me, which is why I saved it for last. So I'm not surprised that happened. It's just fun to see it actually happen because all I ever heard from people is if you go against the grain, if you say something a little bit controversial, even remotely controversial, you'll have the crazies coming after you. And for a while there, I thought, sure, but I doubt that'll happen to me. And that one video was all it took. That one video was all it took, man. So yeah, no, I can see it now. The things that I didn't necessarily ignore, but it was the fact that I just didn't care about because I was one of the normies that just didn't give a shit. Just make video games and I'm going to play them. Turn my brain off, buy the games. But Alan Wake 2 was kind of the thing that woke me up to this stuff. I went from being the normie that didn't care to being someone who does care. It's like they always say. It's like they always say. It's all fun and games until it happens to you. And unfortunately, it did happen to me. It happened to one of my favorite franchises. And that made me very sad. It made me very sad. Fancy says, people will say shit like gamers shouldn't exist, so nothing is surprising anymore. Honestly, Fancy, yeah. When you got people out there saying shit like that, it's not surprising, right? That's what's kind of why I'm not surprised that I have people coming after me. And asking the on the YouTube side says there's a reason I don't say much, which I understand, right? Again, I knew what I was getting myself into when I put that video out, which is why I saved it for last. But man, it's like the crazies came out of the woodwork when I did that shit. And the thing is, I'm not going to stop doing that shit because I care too much about video games as a whole to not speak out against this shit. Like I mentioned in the Assassin's Creed section, I have reason to believe that the rumor about them adding Yasuke to the game was politically driven due to the events that happened in 2020. Because I saw that shift in other forms of entertainment. We're talking movies, TV shows, whatever it might be, ever since that happened. Now, people make the argument that diversity is not a bad thing, and I agree. Diversity is indeed not inherently a bad thing. However, and there's always this argument about forced, well, as long as it's not forced diversity, it's fine. But I would argue that diversity in media will always be forced. It will always be forced. And that it's not necessarily a bad thing. What makes it forced is the writing behind it. If you put a black character in your story, and the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, or at some point throughout the story, one of the things that come out of their mouth is how awful racism is, how evil white people are, how the world is always trying to keep them down, congratulations, you're leading into a stereotype. That's forced diversity. If you put a woman in the game as a lead character, and the first thing that comes out of her mouth, or at some point throughout the story, about how oppressed she is, how evil the patriarchy is, and how people are scared of her because she's so strong and independent, that is forced. That's the shit people are talking about, because it always comes with that. That's why when people saw the female character in Ghost of Yote, it wasn't because they didn't like the idea of a female character being in a lead role. It's because they know with all the caveats that come with it. And there was a whole spiel from one of the YouTubers that I talked about, who was, I think it's in Demion's videos, where an insider reached out to him to talk about Ghost of Yote. And I was going to talk about this last week, but I'll mention a little bit of it here. But in some of that information that he got from an insider is that the original idea wasn't Ghost of Yote at all. And that there was indeed a Ghost of Tsushima 2 that was in the works, starring Jin Sakai. And that the premise was, and this is the part that I hope is not true, because if it is true, I will be so fucking disappointed if it's true. The premise of the sequel was effectively Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. For those of you who don't know, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood was Ezio basically recruiting a guild of assassins to take down the Templars. And at the pitch for Ghost of Tsushima 2 was Jin basically making a band of assassins or ghosts to help fight back against the Mongols and push inwards towards the mainland of Japan. I said, oh my God, I hope that's not true, because Assassin's Creed Brotherhood is like one of my favorite Assassin's Creed games. One of the best ones made. And if that's true, I will be so goddamn disappointed. Oh, man. And even worse is that there was a claim that when this thing was revealed at the State of Play, that a lot of the executives at Sony were kind of blindsided by it. And I thought to myself, I was like, well, how could they be blindsided by it? Because these State of Plays, they have to be reviewed and approved by higher ups at Sony and PlayStation before they ever air. So there's no way they didn't know about this before it was aired. But then I thought about it. I was like you do at 3 o'clock in the morning, like I always do. I always have either the best thoughts or the worst thoughts or the worst thoughts at 3 a.m. in the morning. But like you do at 3 a.m., I thought, wait a minute. Actually, that might be true. I remembered the Secret Level Amazon series that they have coming up soon that's supposed to have episodes starring various Sony franchises and IPs like God of War, obviously Concord, Armored Core, so on and so forth. But one of those episodes is a Ghost of Tsushima episode. And while they didn't necessarily show much in terms of footage of that, the one little glimpse they showed of that episode featured Jin Sakai himself. Now, this could be a case of them making that episode to bridge the gap between what happens in Tsushima to Ghost of Yote. There's a possibility of that. But there's also a possibility that they had no idea of what the next game was going to be, and they assumed that it was going to continue the legacy of Jin, which is why they made that episode dedicated specifically to him. So there is a possibility that a lot of people at Sony had no idea this was going to happen. And based on what that leak was, at least from the insider that reached out to him and talked about it, a lot of people at Sony were kind of furious when this happened, because they weren't anticipating the level of backlash they got for it. And they got a lot. And it's not to say that the new female protagonist is going to be a bad protagonist. We don't know yet. But a lot of people did like Jin for who he was. Obviously, I had my issues with the writing around him because I felt like that could have been better. And I believe that they could have done that better in a sequel, a proper sequel, a direct sequel. That's where I'm disappointed. So yeah, I mean, again, like that's all from what this insider claims. So take everything I'm saying here with a grain of salt, or many grains of salt, the whole damn salt mine. But if any of that is true, that is very disappointing. Because if it is true, then that just kind of lends credence to the idea that they're making a push for this agenda, and everyone's catching on to it, and they're tired of it. Because it says Inner Demon speaks at 3 a.m. I just read that in chat. Because it said Inner Demon speaks at 3 a.m. Also true. Also very true. But yes, that I tend to have either my best thoughts or my worst thoughts at 3 o'clock in the morning. But that was this whole thing was one that came to me at 3 o'clock in the morning when I was working on that, on the previous episode that I had planned for this instead of what this is now. So again, I had a whole spiel about that in the previous episode, but because there's so much news that I had to talk about today, I kind of condensed some of that down. But okay. All right, I'm out of here for real now. This is 2 hours. This podcast is 2 hours long. I'm out of here for real now, guys. So thank you all for watching. I will see you guys next week. Like I said, if I got time over the week next week, I'll try to put out some more short form episodes. Maybe I'll put clips of this out. I don't know. This is a long ass episode, so I might just not do that and just make more short form clips next week. We'll see. But if you missed the whole thing, you can check out the archive. It'll be up on YouTube. Go watch the VOD that way. But yeah, I'm out of here, guys. So thank you all for watching. Social links are in the banners below in the description if you're watching on YouTube. And if you got any questions, you know how to reach me. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Discord. Whatever. If you got info, I'm always out. I'm always listening. I'm always looking. Until next time, you all have a wonderful day or night, depending where you are in the world. You all stay classy, stay sharp. Don't do anything that I wouldn't do, and I will catch you guys next time. You guys have a good one. Love you all. I am out of here. Deuces. And fade to black.